Hey y'all, I'm James Wright and welcome to my shop. Today we're making a really simple little three-piece burr. This will make a great Christmas present, so let's dive in and see how to make it. So we're going to start this project off where we normally do, with paste wax and boiled linseed. Wait, that's how we finish it. We're starting off with a white oak. Okay, I know I get a little repetitive with those two, but yes, we are starting off with a white oak. This is a beautiful piece of really curly white oak, and I got this years ago, and it was a larger board that I've pulled project after project after project off, and this is one of my last little pieces of it. Just gorgeous grain. So for this, we need 3 little pieces that are all, the width needs to be 1/3 of their length. Their thickness, though, you can make it just about whatever you want. Mine are a little over a 1/4 inch thick, just whatever the board was last at. So if they're a 1/4 inch to 3/8, somewhere in that range. If you make them an inch wide, that means they need to be 3 inches long. You can change that dimension to whatever you want as long as they are 1/3 their width to their length. Once we get these blocks cut down, we're going to then give them a little bit of sanding. I want to make sure that they're all exactly the same thickness and the same dimension. Now we're going to create a little case that these go in. You don't have to make this. The puzzle can work by itself. But I wanted to do something a little bit different. And this is a case that they can sit down into. I wanted to make them, the case needs to be 3/4 inch thick because my pieces are a little closer to 3/8. So you want it to be about twice the thickness of the pieces that you made. And this is a chunk of walnut that I have been pulling other chunks of walnut out of. So we're going to resaw this down, and it's going to be 4 inches by 4 inches. I want about a 1/2 inch border all the way around. So if your sticks are 3 inches long, then make your square 4 inches by 4 inches, or whatever they are. So if your stick is 3 inches long, it needs to be 1 inch wide, and then your box needs to be 4 inches. Now that we have it cut down to thickness of about 3/4 inch, we're going to square off one end with the shooting board and then draw a marking line around it so we can then cut it off to 4 inches square. So this is 4 inch by 4 inch by 3/4 inch. And I have this other piece that we'll be using in another project coming up soon. So I want to push those down in, and we want to create a recess that these fit down into. And this is actually a really cool project to stretch your skills a little bit. It's a very simple step to do, but if done poorly, you're going to be blowing out pieces, and it's a good way to really stretch your skills. So we need to find out exactly how much space we have to work with. And in this case, I have a little over 1 inch, and so I'm going to come back and figure out how big they need to be. I want to measure reality and then put a mark around it. And all my marks are going to be coming off of one edge there. So I'm going to be squaring off of the edge and then marking gauge off that edge. So the 2 lines that go perpendicular to my edge, I'm going to make with a square. And the 2 edges that go parallel with it, I'm going to use those with a marking gauge. And that way I know the box I'm marking out is exactly square, and it's exactly the right measurements. And I want to make sure that it is measured to the blocks, not measured to the box, if that makes sense. So I want the blocks to fit inside of this. I don't care what the actual finished dimension of the box itself is, as long as those blocks fit in it. So we're going to work on chiseling this out, and for that I really like using this bench dog clamp. If you don't have any vices, this works well, but anytime I get small pieces, it's nice to be able to clamp them right in the middle of the bench rather than doing them in the outside. So we're going to start by chopping in from the outside and then paring out, and I'm going with the grain in my cuts. I'm not doing anything in the middle at the moment, and once I chop out a little bit, then we're going to come back in with a knife and go a little bit deeper. Chop in a little bit deeper, and this you want to be very, very careful, because if you pound too hard, you're going to blow out the fibers on the end. And so you're just doing as much pressure as you need, and so that's where a lot of this is the skill. Play with it, and you're probably going to end up blowing out a few pieces on the end. But it's kind of repetitive. Chop in, and then pare out to that chop in line, and then chop in, and then pare out. And once you're down close to your depth, then you can come in, put the chisel bevel down, and remove all of the waste in between. To get right up close to that marking gauge line, we're going to stay away from it with the chisel until we get where we're wanting, and then we can chop right into it. And of course, this is one of those scenarios where the router plane is really made for it. You can do it without the router plane, just bevel down with the chisel, but the router plane makes it very nice. And so I get very, very close to it with the chisel, and then I'm going to come in and take out the last few shavings with the router plane. Then on the edge, going with the grain, you can come in and chisel it down. I want to make sure that the blocks actually fit in there, so I'm occasionally checking them, but I want them to sink in so that there's a little lip of them sticking out, just something like a less than a 16th even, like a 32nd, just enough you can feel it, and they kind of pinch themselves in there, and I really like that fit. That's what I'm looking for. They should theoretically be able to fit either direction. You can kind of make them fit with the grain, but across the grain works as well. Now we want to mark out a box in the middle of these, and you don't have to make them exactly in the middle. The only important thing is that there is a box on it. And I'm going to be using a pencil to mark this off because this is a very delicate mark on here, and if I mark it with a knife, there's a chance of maybe moving that block around. Holding with the holdfast does make it very simple, but marking with a pencil is actually, I find, to be a little bit more accurate because I'm not going to be moving the block around. And as I just have to understand, I don't touch the pencil mark. On all of these blocks, we're going to be drilling some holes. One of them is a hole in the middle. One of them is a T shape, and one of them is an L shape, and you'll see that as they come up. And the measurements on all of these are just the measurements of the blocks themselves. So the one that has a hole in the middle matches the measurements of the block. The one that has a T matches the measurement of the block with the hole in the middle, and then the T is the block's thickness coming down into the middle of it. And then the one that's L is half and half, and you'll see that here. So once we drill all the holes out, then we can come back in and slowly work back into it. Now, normally I'd want to chop from both sides, but if you put a sacrificial block on the back and you really lock it down, you can chop all the way through and just chop into the sacrificial block on the other side. That works really well, but just make sure you're chopping down close to getting all the way through. Don't go all the way through, and then when you get really where you want to be, then you can get all the way through. You can refine the shape then with files and rasps and get it to a nice clean fit so that the block slides into it. This one you can see is the T shape, and so that slot going down to the T is the same as the thickness of all of the blocks. And then the main T space inside is the exact same shape of it. This is the L shape one, and you can see how the chop going down into it is the same as a block. And then we have the half where that T cuts off. I hope that makes sense. But it's these three simple shapes. And then once you make them so that the blocks can fit into them, then you can slide them in, one into the other, and you kind of play with it until, does it go this way? Does it go that way? And it's one of those, once you wrap your brain around it, it makes sense and everything is happy. But then you realize, oh yeah, this block has to come in from the other side. And it's a really simple project. It's kind of a fun one that you can make for kids to introduce them to burrs and burr puzzles. I really like how this one came out. It's just a really easy, simple puzzle. And just like that, you have a burr. And it sits. But then we were looking at this and thinking, yeah, it just kind of sits on here, but it would be nice if it actually stood up on there. Luke, the videographer, gave the idea, well, what if you cut in a slot for it to fit into? And I was like, oh, yeah, let's do that. So we're going to mark it out on here just like we did before. And originally, I wish I had put that center block in there and marked the hole from that, because then I could make sure when the center block went in, you get the hole perfectly lined up. But for this one, I just eyeballed it. And we're going to do the exact same thing we did before. We are going to chop in from the ends and then pair in. The problem with this one is the hole is way too small to get a router plane into. And so for this, we are just going to do the bottom with a chisel. You don't need a router plane to get a nice, clean, finished bottom on this. You're just going to work at it until you get it the way you want it. Bevel down, it's amazing what you can do, taking it right back to those lines. Then at this point, it's functional. We're just going to detail it up. I'm going to use a block plane to chamfer the corners, break the edges that I want, and then we're going to hit it with a little bit of sandpaper. The sandpaper will allow the finish to soak in a little bit deeper into the wood so that you get a slightly stronger penetration on there. And before finishing, clean the bench off. Yes, this is an important step. Here's the sandpaper. I'm just going to be touching all the corners. I want to keep these rectangular. I have seen a few people make them octagonal, but if you do that, make sure your holes are also octagonal. And then, of course, touch up all the surfaces. And this is where you realize, ooh, I should go back and trim that up a little bit. Hit it with a plane, and then come back and hit it with the sandpaper. We just more or less want to get it to the point where it feels good in the hand and nothing is catching on it. And of course, this would not be Wood by Wright without some homemade boiled linseed oil. Happiness. And I just love what it does to this curly oak. It just explodes with texture. And oh, yes. I let it sit on there as long as it needs to. Let it soak in. The longer you let it sit in there, it'll soak up more. You add more to it and you just keep going until it's not absorbing anymore. Then you wipe off the excess, and I go straight into putting paste wax on top of that. You can let it cure overnight, but I have no problem with just putting paste wax right on top of it. And like that, it's done. And I really like how these came out. The color and the contrast, oak and walnut really go well together. They are a complement without that crazy contrast you normally get with maple and walnut. The two just kind of, they sit together, but they are different enough that there is a natural contrast to it. And so we can actually show how this comes together. Make sure you put the pieces in correctly so you get the actual burr shape, and then it has a natural stand so you can show how the burr fits in here. Turn it around, pop it down in, and voila, puzzle. Kind of like this one. Really simple project. This took me about 2 hours to make. Most people could do this with very basic skills, and it's a lot of fun. A cool Christmas gift idea. Happy! So there you have it. I really like how this came out. With the slight raise on it, it feels good. It's a very interesting little puzzle, especially having it all in this case that you can display it on. I really like this. This came out a lot better than I was expecting, and it's a fairly quick project. This took me about 2 hours to make. Especially if you have some nice little scraps left around that are interesting. You could make this out of 3 different types of wood, and you have a lot of fun with that. This is a great little Christmas gift idea. So if you like that, I do also have a playlist of other gift ideas that are relatively quick to make and are fun to hand out, especially other little hand puzzles. I'll leave links to those down below. So I hope you like this. Let me know your thoughts. What could I do differently? What is something I could learn from this? I'd love to read through that. I do learn a lot from the comments, and that means a lot, as well as anytime you put a comment down below, even if it's just a comment down below, as well as hitting share, like, subscribing. That helps out the channel. Thank you. Without that, we wouldn't grow. The algorithm here is really key, and so if you could help me with that, that would be fantastic. But if you do want to take the help even farther, there are a whole bunch of names over here. Those are all of the fantastic, wonderful, and benevolent people on Patreon. Without patrons or members in this channel, we wouldn't exist. You guys keep the lights on by keeping us going. We are completely funded by you, the viewer. So thank you for that. If you'd like to find out more about Patreon and hear about the special perks for that, there's links to that in the description, or click the little join button and become a member here on YouTube. I think that'll do it for now. And until next time, have a wonderful day. I've made a lot of burrs in the past, but this one's pretty small. You could say it was probably only like a 40-degree burr.